I don't remember which one that was, but I do recall there being one. Now somebody will go, you need to figure out which one that is so that I can say.
I am not your Google.
Help me with hip-hop. Let's get it right. Protect your patience. Day and night. Donna and David, the experts on your side. Help me with hip-hop. Let's get it right.
Today we're going to be talking about something that happens more often than most people want to admit. You give somebody access to your systems, they do whatever they got to do, they leave, and you never, ever revoke their access.
Yeah.
Man. And if you think this doesn't happen, guess what? We have a study that proves otherwise. And this happens a lot when you have third-party vendors.
And a settlement.
Yeah, and a settlement.
It says otherwise.
Yeah. But before we get into all that, let's remind you guys, time is running out on the next PriSec Bootcamp coming up in May 13th through 16th, Stone Mountain, Georgia. Tell us all about it, Donna.
We talked about it a bunch, but if you've never heard about it.
If this is your first time hearing about it.
It's five, oh God forbid, 4 intensive days of learning.
It feels like 5.
I know, it feels like 5. And we purposely keep it very small so that we can do one-on-one sessions and work with everybody. And I haven't even told you yet, David, but between all of my team telling me, oh, we need to, so-and-so is delayed on getting their approvals and want us to delay to this day, and so-and-so wants to delay, and can you give me a coup? So finally I just said, screw it, the early bird price is the price. I'm not messing with it anymore, because every time I turn around, somebody wanted some different thing, and it was, I know you're surprised to hear that I just got frustrated and quit.
You didn't quit, you gave in. You gave in to the pressure.
It was I want it for so-and-so to have this and so-and-so else. Well, then we need to talk to such and such because we told them that. And I'm like, I'm done. I'm out. Look, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm not changing. I'm not going in there and changing it anymore. What?
Well, there you go, folks. So her frustration is now a benefit of yours. You take advantage of the early bird pricing all the way up to May the 12th. But I wouldn't wait that long.
Who knows who's going to make me mad the next time?
Yeah.
And,
but if you show up on May 13th with cash, we'll see you somewhere.
Yeah. That's right.
But find out more at PriSecBootcamp.com. That's PriSecBootcamp.com. And everything will be there that you need. And I hope to make it through today's recording. I am under the weather, and thanks to great technology and editing, hopefully you will not hear me coughing my head off, but we'll see how that goes. But let's dive into it. Let's go to the HIPAA briefs. We have OCR threw out another settlement last week.
Yes, it is the 11th ransomware action and the 7th risk analysis action.
Yeah. So wow.
Double dingy.
Yeah. It's not going to take long before the risk analysis initiative catches up with the ransomware enforcement.
Yeah, the ransomware, they got enough, a bunch of those a couple of years ago when they started those. So, and there's no shortage of them finding ransomware cases. Although they didn't find this case the way. So this is Guam Memorial Hospital Authority. And for all of you that think that you're too small, come on, they're doing Guam.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the way there. So and this gets to reading between the lines, David.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to, it's like, read what I didn't write.
Yeah. An HHS investigation was initiated due to a January 7th, 2019 complaint. So somebody filed a complaint. Normally we would hear in a case of a ransomware attack, that they had filed their breach notification.
Yes, we would.
So I'm not really sure because the investigation revealed that around 5,000 individuals, EPHI was compromised during a December 2018 ransomware attack. So December 2018, it hasn't been 60 days, but what were they complaining about? If you know what I mean?
Yeah, like they're still within their window of time to file.
Yeah.
Somebody ain't liking something.
It's like somebody they didn't self-report.
No, but so here's my take. Here's your two options that I believe happened. I think either you had a disgruntled employee did it, or you had the bad guy did it. If you're not going to pay the ransom, then we're going to report you.
Well, they've threatened that before.
Yeah.
I've never seen it done in healthcare. And it seems like we would have heard about that if that were the case. But hey, information sharing is a problem, because if we don't know they're doing it, we can't, be prepared for it and have a plan.
Yeah. Well, I'm leaning toward the disgruntled employee only because of what you're about to say next.
Oh, yeah, there's a possibility. Because while they were investigating the ransomware attack, and we tell you these investigations drag on forever. Mm-hmm. And while they were investigating, they get another complaint about a different thing. So they get a complaint on March 17th, 2023.
Yeah, this is 5 years later. Well, 4 years later.
Yeah, well, somewhere in there. So the complaint said that 2 former employees accessed their systems in March 2023 after their employment had ended.
Now, who would know that?
Yeah. And I'm thinking in both cases, somebody knows that stuff's happening and is, I don't know, trying to stir trouble. I don't know.
Yeah.
So
anyway, somebody told on them.
We're not sure. There's something happening up in there to cause that to happen, And this is what we try to tell people is, it could be anybody that knows about this that is able to file a complaint.
Mm-hmm.
And if they file the complaint, then you have to provide the receipts that the complaint is not true. And it's clear that they were not able to do that. So we got here's a ransomware attack, which is bad enough. That happened. And then to prove to be sure, and like you said, just your untold employee, they can see what's happening. The lack of security controls, former employees are accessing the system, which they shouldn't do.
Yeah. Yeah. I can envision like this IT guy saying, I understand that Dr. Bob is well thought of and all that, but he can't access these systems. And they're like, no. Don't worry about that. You worry about yourself. And
worry about yourself.
He's like, I'll fix this. I know who to complain to.
Yeah. So, no shock when you have multiple failures and the complaints are happening. The only violation they put in the settlement was the failure to conduct the SRA. So we don't know what else might be going on.
Yeah.
I don't know. All those negotiations take place in legal encapsulation, if you will.
Yeah.
So we don't know what we don't know.
Mm-hmm. But we can assume.
Yeah, so there's a lot of, you could read between the lines and pick things up with this one. And the 3-year cap is a different thing. It's 3 years, not 2.
Yeah.
But it could also be how they managed to reduce the amount down to 25,000 instead of some of these larger amounts that we've seen. So they paid $25,000 and a 3-year corrective action plan. And who knows what's going to happen there.
That's right.
But hopefully,
Hopefully.
So there we have absolute, it happens. We talk about how it happens. We know it happens. And then we see this report.
Yeah. It's like, what? Poneman dropped a report that that you and I saw, and it talks about, guess what? Privilege access.
And this is an issue twofold, because most people don't think about privilege access. They have to worry about, insiders. Everybody expects that, but you also have issues with third parties having privileged users.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, I know that you go out of your way with your teams. They don't operate as administrator on your clients' accounts.
No,
only when they need.
Well, we have this system that gives them just-in-time administrative access. So when they log in, it creates a temporary administrative user, and when they're done, it removes that user.
Right. So when they get in, though, they're there not to do normal work. They're there to do administrative stuff.
Yep.
And they don't log in with administrative level usernames and passwords on their work computers. Nope. And so that's what we're talking about is, why should I have all the time access to everything if I don't need all the time access to everything?
Yeah, we see this, at least on the IT side. I see this often when we're coming into a new client and they've had MSP in the past. I can almost tell you how many MSPs they've had by their systems.
Yeah.
Because there'll be remote access that's still left there. And I'm not necessarily pointing the finger at the MSP. Sometimes it's because the systems weren't on when, the uninstall script got sent out or whatever the case might be. So there's different reasons why it could still be there. But there's different remote access tools that are still there, and sometimes they're active and sometimes they're not. But there's the usernames can often still be there. So there's still access, even if it's not remote. If somebody were to sit down at that computer, they can still gain access. And oftentimes there's employees that we see. Like it's always a telltale sign. We walk in and we're like, wait a minute, you got 15 employees, but there's 50 something people in the Active Directory.
Yeah. That was one of the things that they noted in this report. And so it's cybersecurity infrastructure to reduce third-party and privileged internal access risk, a global study, creating the infrastructure to reduce it. Basically, they did a global survey, and Anna Poneman spends forever making sure exactly the question to ask to get information, because if people misunderstand the question, you're not going to get the right information. So basically it was, yes, third party and insider access risk it's a problem, and it seems to be growing, not getting better. And it's this concept of over provisioning. Is everybody has maximum access to everything. That shouldn't be. I don't care if it's 5 employees.
Well, we see this when we'll get a call. Hey, I've got a copier guy here. Just give him access to everything. What? But the copier people, and I'm not picking on them, but the copier people are like, well, we need to have access so that we can We can look into our systems and it reports back and tells us information on the copiers and all this kind of stuff. And then you've got the guy who puts in the alarm system. He needs admin access to something. And then you got every vendor that has software needs access to something. And it's like, good grief.
Yeah. And you got vendors you used to have that create profiles for themselves. And their installs might go create, install this as administrator means that little install script can build all kinds of things automatically.
Mm-hmm.
And we had, back in olden times, and all the systems we worked on, we still had to have an administrator level person. And we had remote access, both of those capabilities. But that was it. We didn't have internet getting to it. The only thing that could get to it were things that were physically connected or knew that one phone number and had that specific type of configuration, because it wasn't just a standardization at that time in the olden times.
Yeah.
But everybody knew how to log in. Everybody knew where it was. It was a problem. But because there was the lack of overall connectivity, it really was a low risk problem. Right. We're not talking low risk problem now.
Nah.
Now, everybody thinks I got this. And that's part of the problem, confidence. Some people have, technology people. But overall, most people know I probably got people getting stuff they shouldn't get to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not something I'm going to worry enough about.
Yeah. I'm
just not going to do it.
Well, Bob's been here 20 years, and I know his family. He wouldn't do anything like that.
I know, right? So the thing is, if you look at larger organizations now, somebody's role is to be director, head of something, identity access management.
Mm-hmm.
Making sure that all of the different varied systems that all have access to things. And when I have somebody in a system, that individual can go in and out of different parts of the organization as they got new jobs. And so now they're looking at identifying the person, and then the identity can get connected to different systems. Well, we're nowhere near that ever happening in the small environment. We know that, the small and medium environment. But the fact that they are having someone whose job role is just to manage that in a large environment tells you it's something you can't overlook. And it's not something you can fully automate. Somebody's got to be paying attention. So, you've got that huge threat of all of the people that either work for you or you've hired to work with you that all have access. And do you really know what all their access levels are? Do you know what they can do? We're going to go with probably not. That's what I would think.
Oh, yeah.
They can assume that they know what you would do, but I, as a one of your clients, should know that you have this thing so that you're not going to have the actual admin user login. And, I should have a plan for that, and I should understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But when they said, like 69% of the organizations don't have any kind of control strategy or continuous monitoring for access issues.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And only 29% were highly confident in their abilities to enforce access policies on third-party users. And
wow.
That might be a high number because third-party users, there doesn't seem to be... I am not aware in most environments of understanding what the third parties are capable to do and who has logins and are they sharing it. And I think that it's time to really, when we say give me an access list, and they ensure oh yeah, it's got everybody. Well, does it have third parties? I mean, it depends on where you're getting that access list from. Are you pulling that access list from your EMR? Are you pulling that access list from your Active Directory? And if I'm pulling it from one or not the other, then do I know I got everybody? Right? So we've got that issue right off the bat. And then we know deprovisioning is poorly handled.
Oof,
40% do not have a formal process.
Huh. Wow.
So when a vendor leaves, you need to have a formal process for decommissioning the vendor, just like you do, offboarding an employee.
Yeah. And don't forget offboarding a piece of equipment.
Indeed. Because especially some of the equipment has its own admin level controls, and there are a lot of things that aren't being thought about in this picture, according to this report. Not surprised by it, but I know that when I was in a discussion a while back about having a policy and procedure for terminating business associate agreements. People are like, why we got to have that? This is why. This is just one of the reasons why. You also need to know where your PHI is going if they have it, but making sure that their access has been terminated and will not be turned back on is a huge piece. And that's just for the business associates. But I figure that's going to get the vast majority of them right there. Because if you got access, you're a business associate almost certainly.
Yeah.
Because you have access. So the fact that we know they don't have confidence, they don't have a deprovisioning process. Then they also said executives are out of step with actual risk levels. There's a significant disconnect between the leadership's perception and the reality of insider and third-party risk. Also not surprised.
No. I mean, we even see that in small places, where you think that leadership has a closer ear to the ground because, it's a small practice.
Yeah.
You still have the same issue. So in larger practice, I imagine it's massively different. It's a huge gap between what they perceive in reality.
Well, it just depends on how intent they are, right? Because, that's something we should bring up. You and I were just at the same place at the same time. Last week's podcast, we actually recorded in the same place. But the HSCC, one of the regional meetings was in Charlotte. But we had these great conversations with folks there. It was interesting knowing we were the only ones representing the small and medium market. Everybody else there was, big vendors or big health systems or hospitals. But they were fully engaged in talking with us.
Yeah.
Because it impacts them and they know it. So that we have to have that level of understanding in the small and medium market. What happens with you impacts the entire community. And we need you to know that. So that is we did a lot of discussions about the education piece on getting leadership to understand and how could we get clinical staff to understand. And I found it quite interesting that the majority of the folks in the room, after a lot of discussion, Not a study by any means, but, a lot of discussion that it seemed to be a consensus across the room that the most effective way of training, shy of having an actual major event, you learn, but that's not the way we want you to learn, was tabletop exercises. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority of small and mediums don't do tabletop exercises. No. So we got to work on that. We're going to work on that. We're going to come up with something. I started making a plan, which is usually means my team rolled their eyes and sighed deeply, and I'll run off in 40 directions before I can settle on something that they're going to have to do, and that's what the rolling the eyes and the sigh was. So I have ideas, though, but I don't know if we've done that.
Yeah, if you're like me, you couldn't listen to the next 30 minutes of sessions because you're too busy thinking about how you're going to solve that problem.
I did. I was immediately scribbling little notes periodically about that. How do I solve for this? You know that. We were both scribbling notes back and forth to each other.
Ooh, listen. Yeah.
What if we did this? So the meeting, though, we covered a lot of things, and looking forward to, there's a report coming out from HSCC. Maybe even before you listen to this episode, we'll have it in our hands, or we'll have it and be able to talk about it, because I actually do have it. I just can't talk about it. But it's recommendations for assisting what do they call it? Under-resourced. Mm-hmm. Or resource constrained. That was it. That's because you got to have a word for everything now. You got to spend a lot of time figuring out what you're going to call it. Resource constrained, which they defined what that is and did some interviews. And David and I have some thoughts on what the interview results were. We can discuss all of that when we get it. But a big part of that discussion was awareness of leadership. In many different parts of the day, we discussed the fact that executives have to get plugged in, and how can you get them plugged in?
So this next statistic is kind of alarming. 52% experienced a third-party related cybersecurity incident. Wow. Over half.
Yeah, and it's saying that they stem from overprivileged access or access no longer needed. That they utilize those, and I've seen that. Which one? There was a big breach where there was an old user name password that was still hanging out there, and somebody used it. It never been taken out, and it was something they had used somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's always the problem, because somebody uses the same username and password somewhere, it gets caught up in a breach. And so it's known, it gets plugged into some database somewhere, and then that information never gets removed from systems or changed. And so it's a risk.
So I don't know whether or not I don't remember which one that was, but I do recall there being one. Now somebody will go, you need to figure out which one that is so that I can say.
I am not your Google.
And then if 59% of organizations had a third party or insider caused breach within the last 2 years, not surprised by that. Yeah. And, so many of these insider breaches we don't hear about because they're less than 500.
Right.
And you might hear a little about it here and there. There's lawsuits and those kind of things where you might see those happening. But for the most part, they're going to access less than 500 patients, but often more than 2.
Yeah.
And the 2 might be, the ex-girlfriend or the ex-boyfriend and the new girlfriend or the new boyfriend. And people don't realize how often that happens, I think.
Yeah. Well, it is worth reminding everybody, as we pointed out a couple episodes ago, that no matter what gets reported, the numbers are always higher.
Yeah, that's true.
By 1,000%. Remember, 1,000%.
So one of the areas that they brought up, which is often brought up, and I'm curious just what you're seeing about the zero trust model. Their point is it's underutilized, that just 21% of the organizations were using zero trust. And we've talked about it a few times, but it's not as easy as it's often presented. So where do you see, is anything changing? Are we getting down that path where we can use it in an SMB environment?
So the zero trust is out there and it's good. The problem is people don't have the patience to deal with what it really takes to set these models up. Because in order for me to come in and roll out zero trust, you've got to be willing to give me time to train the system. Meaning it's going to get all up in your way until we figure out all the things it needs to let through. Because remember, zero trust means you start from nothing gets through and then you start adding on the pieces. Well, that means it is very disruptive in the beginning. So that's the problem from the organizational side. From the MSP side, it is so time intensive to get these things set up properly and to keep them set up properly. And so it's not as easy as a lot of the other tools when it's like, for example, malware, anti-malware. I can just throw that out there, just put a template configuration on it and I'm good to go. And it's not the case with zero trust. Now you can do some templated stuff, but for the most part, you want to come in with as little access as possible and then build from there. And people just don't have the appetite for it.
Yeah, well, I used to believe that was the way to do it. I would shut things down when I was redoing security for a site. I would shut it down to very little and then, all right, well, you tell me when you don't have access to something that you need, and then we'll put that back in so that you start from the small. We don't have time for that.
Right. That's exactly what we get. We got people now. One of the things we do is called privileged access management. So basically it's zero trust for administrative access or privileged access, which you think is great, right? If you need to install something, if your employees need to install something or whatever, it's got to go through a process and it has to be approved, manually approved by a person who puts their eyes on it. You wouldn't believe I got one last week, promise you. The owner of the company sends me a message. I want this stuff taken off my systems. It takes y'all way too long to approve something. And I'm like, okay, let me take a look at it. So I go in, look at it, 6 minutes. It took us 6 minutes to approve his request. And I'm like, that's not a problem. 6 minutes is not a problem. I mean, from the time that you tried to do it, we got the notification, we look into it, we verify it, all that, then approved it. 6 minutes. I think that's pretty freaking good. But his appetite was not 6 minutes.
It wasn't even 6 seconds.
No. Sure. And it's like, can you take it off all of our systems? I'm like, God, come on, man. Seriously? You're going to take all that risk and remove all that security from all your systems because you can't wait 6 minutes to have something approved. It doesn't make sense.
I mean, if you know you're going to need something installed or it's urgent, then go ahead and call.
Yeah. But you know how often that happens?
Yeah.
I mean, almost never. But
yeah,
that's what it is. It's another way for people to point to it and say, security is getting in my way and it needs to be removed. Instead of saying, okay, the security seems to be getting in my way. What are my options?
Right.
And let's have a discussion about that. Maybe there are the other options or maybe there isn't.
Yeah.
But, a 6 minute turnaround time is just not understanding the expectations.
Well, and that's a 6 minute turnaround time on a business user. Somebody working in the ER can't have 6 minute turnaround time. right, to take care of patients. You can't wait 6 minutes. But on the flip side of that, you're probably not installing software when you're trying to deal with
Yeah,
it.
we're not talking about normal computer usage. We're talking about installing something that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
It's usually something you want to not allow your people to do.
It's generally considered a very, very, not just best practice, but highly recommended, please don't do it any other way practice. Of don't just let people install things on their own with no questions asked.
Yeah.
Because most people don't understand what they're installing.
Mm-mm.
Well, most people don't even read the screen. They just hit okay, yes, yes.
Yeah, which is how we have so many software packages that get side installed. Like you installed the thing that you wanted to install, but you didn't know that during the process, you also told it could install 3 or 4 other things.
Yeah.
And so the thing that we approved was not just all that got installed. It was all this other stuff that you did.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that happens.
Yes. So that's why zero trust models are great. And they do solve a lot of problems, but it's not something that we can use across the board. I just don't see that being the overall solution unless, AI is able to do it better. And that's a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
That AI could evaluate and make these decisions quickly and effectively, that might help.
Yeah, I think it'll get better and it'll get faster. And at some point, it'll be completely invisible to the user, probably.
Yeah.
But we're nowhere near that right now.
Yeah. And that's a part of what discussions have been about is nobody's made these things be a priority and made them be a requirement so that we would get there before now. They've always been set aside, and not been a priority. And that's why we have so many problems today. Or at least that's just my opinion.
That's all that matters.
That's what we're here for today, David. So, but I think the overall gist of this is we have to have, number one, recognize the problem and understand it is a problem at all levels of the organization. That's you got that part, because the other parts aren't going to get fixed until that part happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a big piece of it is we don't start there in a lot of things. But the second then is making sure that we understand it's not just people who are employees, but it's also contractors, subcontractors, all of your other, software, business associates of all these different flavors that you have in that may have access for one reason or another. Then those need to have a formal offboarding process like we should be doing for employees. And it is not as easy as everybody thinks it is once you sit down to do it. Why am I having to do this? So that you know what they have access to is where we have to start.
Yep. So people have some auditing to do for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're not regularly checking and removing anything that looks odd and escalating it if it looks really odd, then if you see something that is 30 days old and they haven't logged in, I mean, back in the olden times, I had routines that would automatically disable users who hadn't logged in 30 days. And they'd be like, well, I only need to look once a month at that system. I'm like, then once a month, you need to call.
Yeah.
Or you need to do it on a regular basis. Make sure it hasn't been 30 days.
Yeah. And it's worth pointing out, too, that we're not just talking about, Active Directory or users on your computers. We're also talking about your cloud systems as well.
And that's huge.
Yeah. So you've got Microsoft 365, you've got Google, you've got your EHR, you got, you can name a million different programs. Yeah.
Yeah.
But they all have users that get set up, and you have to treat them the same way. You have to decommission them when they're not in use anymore.
Yeah. If anything, the cloud apps are the worst part because they don't have to have access to your network, your computers, nothing. For most of the cloud apps, they can just go log in.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where we are. We have got to get that done. And it is clear that it is one area that would not be massively hard if we just started doing a better job of deprovisioning. Just that. That would make a difference.
Yep. It would.
So there's your goal, is to focus on that, but that requires you to get the leadership buy-in, yada yada yada. So there you have it.
All right, folks. That's it. That is our show for today. Be sure to join us again next week. Share this out to somebody. I know you know somebody that does provision that don't need to be. Join us again next time. And until then, remember, HIPAA's not about compliance. It's about patient care.
You've been listening to the Help Me with HIPAA podcast, hosted by Donna Grindle and David Sims. The show created to help you with HIPAA. For more information or to ask us a question, visit our website at helpmewithhipaa.com. Neither Donna Grindle or David Sims are attorneys, and they do not offer binding legal advice concerning regulatory compliance. The information in this podcast should not be relied upon or construed as legal advice in any way. Consult your attorney for legal advice concerning compliance with HIPAA regulations.